Next witness, Mr. Goudie, please.
Thank you, Mark. I was on the point of calling the actuary, my lord, but I see that Dr. Davies is here, and I think to let him get away, I'll call him next, if I may. Dr. Davies?
Lift your right hand, please, please.
You swear that the evidence to be given by you to the court and the jury sworn shall be touching on matters between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you.
Yes, I do.
Dr. Davies, you're a qualified medical practitioner licensed to practice in Ontario.
I am.
When and where
I'm
did you...
prepared to concede Dr. Davies' qualifications as an eminent orthopod.
My lord, lest the jury not be as familiar as my friend with the doctor's unquestioned qualification, I'd like, if I may, to review them.
Yes, certainly.
Doctor, when and where did you graduate from medicine?
I graduated from the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto in 1944.
Did you thereafter do postgraduate studies?
Yes, my postgraduate studies included an internship at the Toronto General Hospital following graduation. I then served as a medical officer in the Canadian Army during the war, and following discharge from the Army, I taught anatomy, physiology, and pathology, as well as experimental surgery at the University of Toronto for 3 years. Subsequently, I served as a senior resident in general surgery at Sunnybrook Hospital. Following this, I undertook 3 years of postgraduate work in orthopedic surgery in New York City at the Hospital for Bone and Joint Diseases. I'm a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons of Canada in orthopedic surgery. I'm a fellow of the International College of Orthopedic Surgeons and Traumatologists, a member of the Canadian Orthopedic Association, and I'm chief of the Department of Orthopedics at the Scarborough General Hospital.
And for the benefit of the jury, Doctor, what is the practice of orthopedic surgery?
It deals with injuries and diseases of bones and joints and the muscles and ligaments that operate the bones and joints.
And in your role at the hospital, had you occasion to attend on and treat Mr. Robert Paget following an accident in which he was involved the 9th of February last?
Yes, Mr. Paget was brought to our hospital, the Scarborough General Hospital, at 12:30 in the morning on the 10th of February by ambulance. And following his admission to the emergency department, his condition was assessed. He was found to be suffering from shock due to blood loss. His blood pressure was low, and he was in rather poor condition. He had multiple injuries, including a fracture of the shaft of the right femur, his thigh bone, and he was also found to have several broken ribs in the right side of his chest, a broken right wrist, some small lacerations on his face and hands. These weren't of any great importance. And in addition to this, he was found to have a fracture of the pelvis. Now, all of these injuries, of course, were rather painful, and our first efforts to help him were to transfuse him with blood, to treat his blood loss that was in fractures of this magnitude, and there is considerable blood loss, and this is what causes shock. His fractured femur was put in a splint in order to control pain, and his broken ribs, which were also very painful, were treated by injecting some local anesthetic into the fracture sites. And his broken wrist was treated by putting a cast on it. It didn't have to be manipulated or fixed because the bones were not seriously displaced. Then when his general condition had improved over the next several hours, it became clear to us that his condition was good enough to permit some more definitive treatment to his major injury, which was the fractured femur.
Doctor, just in passing, I'm not sure whether you've explained to the gentleman what the femur is.
The femur is the thigh bone. And we generally like to treat fractures of the thigh bone by applying some form of rigid internal fixation. We fix the bone in such a way that it is held snugly together so that the bone ends do not move. And if the bone ends don't move, then the patient does not have any serious pain, and healing will occur more rapidly and in good position. And the treatment we choose to, if we can, if the fracture is of the type that permits, what we do, since the femur or the thigh bone is a hollow tubular bone, we insert a steel rod down the center, right through the marrow canal, the hollow portion. And this is a long steel rod that may vary depending on the size of the man, from 12 inches to 18 inches in length. And by passing it down the marrow canal, or the hollow part of the bone ends are brought very snugly together, and the bone ends do not move, and it holds the femur or the thigh bone in perfect position, and it reduces pain. This was done later in the afternoon, around 2:30 that afternoon, or 2 o'clock that afternoon. And following this, he was brought into the recovery room, which is just off the operating rooms, where he was nursed until he had recovered from his anesthetic. And then he was returned to his room. Because his general condition was rather poor, because of these multiple injuries, and because he was in considerable pain, we arranged for him to have 3 special nurses around the clock.
And did they continue in attendance with him, doctor, until he died?
Yes, they did. Well, no, at the time of death, he had only 1 special nurse because he had, up until then, shown progressive improvement. His pain gradually subsided. He did present a rather difficult nursing problem because when an individual has multiple fractures, and particularly fractures of the ribs, it is difficult and painful to breathe. And if the patient does not breathe properly or deeply, the lungs may become congested, they may develop pneumonia, things of that sort. And so it's very important to have the patient move and to breathe deeply, and nurses must often urge the patient to do so. During this time, of course, they are moved and turned so that they don't get bed sores. If they lie in one position in bed for hours at a stretch, one can often have a patient who will develop bed sores. And so it's important for the patient to move in spite of pain. And so the patient was sedated. He was given various drugs to relieve pain and at the same time to keep him moving. And that is the reason that special nurses were necessary.
Mm-hmm. I take it, doctor, that type of chest therapy was the sort of treatment that Mr. Paget had.
Yes, of course.
He was encouraged to breathe deeply and was turned regularly. How effective in reducing pain, in his case, was the administration of analgesics or whatever form of that type of medication was used?
Well, in order to reduce pain, relieve pain, one has to give rather strong narcotics. Narcotics, though, do have a dangerous effect if given in large quantity, because narcotics do depress breathing. And so that we must steer a middle course between giving too little, which would be the optimum thing, because we want the patient to breathe deeply. We don't wish to depress the respiration of the patient. And yet at the same time, to relieve pain, one must give an adequate amount. And so there is a rather nice, fine balance between giving too little and having the patient in pain, and giving too much and having the patient not breathe properly. And we did try to steer a careful middle course.
Did you see him on a day-to-day basis during his
hospitalization? Yes, I saw him daily.
And would it be part of your concern in better attending to him and diagnosing the problems to inquire whether or not he was in pain from time to time?
Well, yes, an individual with fractured femur, fractured wrist, fractured ribs, fractured pelvis, multiple bruises and so on is, of course, going to be in pain. Generally speaking, this diminishes day by day. Usually the first 2 or 3 days are the worst, and then subsequently it diminishes, and usually by the end of a week or so, the patient is seldom requires heavy sedation. The aches and pains do begin to subside by then. Not completely, but to a large extent.
Doctor, in the ordinary course of things, would these injuries have been an effective cause of his death?
Oh, no. I had every expectation that he would recover completely. None of these injuries would have left him with any permanent disability. His fractures would all have healed, and he would have been returned to his previous state of health, without any doubt.
What then, doctor, was the cause of death?
He died very suddenly and very tragically from a pulmonary embolus.
Would you explain that for
Yes.
my benefit and the jury?
Well, it is well known that patients who have been badly injured, or patients who are seriously ill and are confined to bed for long periods, will often develop clots, blood clots within the veins of their legs, the veins of the thigh, or the veins of the pelvis, or the abdomen, due primarily to the fact that when a patient lies quietly and is not moving about a lot, the blood circulation tends to stagnate in these veins. And since the blood does stagnate to some extent, it doesn't move about rapidly or vigorously, it tends to pool and to clot. These clots that form in the veins do so very silently. They don't give us any warning. There are no signs or symptoms which tell us that this is happening. And suddenly, one of these blood clots may detach from the vein in the leg or in the pelvis and then be carried in the bloodstream up to the heart, through the heart and into the arteries which go into the lung. And suddenly, as the clot enters the arteries that go to the lung, death occurs, if it's a large clot. And this is what happened to Mr. Paget.
Doctor, then, to summarize that approach to the problem, may I ask you whether or not, in your opinion, as a specialist, the injuries that the plaintiff sustained in the accident that we're concerned with were, in that way, a direct and effective cause of his death?
Oh, absolutely so. This, the causal relation, or the cause of his death, was entirely due to the injuries he sustained as a result of the accident.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, my lord. Doctor, Mr. Paget spent his time prior to his death with the well-founded hope that he would recover.
Yes.
And that he would recover substantially completely.
Yes.
His death was no less unexpected to him than to you.
That is true.
And in that sense, he was at least spared the pain that a man experiences in knowing for some time that he's going to die.
Yes, that is true.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, my lord.
No re-examination.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you,
Davies.
Lord.
Mr. Lofty, please.
Look in your right hand, face right, please.
I swear that the evidence to be given by you to the court and the jury sworn touching the matters in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you.
Mr. Lofty, what is your occupation?
I'm an actuary.
And would you explain for me what that means? What is this actuarial science?
An actuary is a technical mathematical expert in matters of life insurance, probabilities of death, this type of thing.
Are you professionally qualified then to give an opinion as to life expectancies of average people in our population?
Definitely.
What training is there behind that specialty?
There's a set of 10 exams which I have to write. These involve various types of mathematical and insurance-related subjects, and in particular, there's one exam was on this type of things, and I've passed all these exams. I've become a fellow.
Do you hold a degree?
Yes, I do. I have 2 degrees, actually. I have a degree from university, and I also have a degree I'm a fellow of the Society of Actuaries and of the Canadian Institute of Actuaries.
When did you obtain your undergraduate degree?
My undergraduate degree was 65.
In what degree was it?
It's a BSc degree. I took the honor maths and physics course at the University of Toronto,
Right.
and graduated in 65 with first-class honors.
And became a fellow of the Society of Actuaries when?
1971.
And are you presently engaged professionally in the actuarial science as you've described it?
Yes, I am. I'm an actuarial consultant at Confederation Life Insurance Company.
At my request, did you undertake to determine the life expectancy of a Canadian male born, excuse me, Lord, on the 1st of July, 1924?
Yes, I did.
And what do you advise us as to that life expectancy?
The life expectancy for a male born on July the 1st, 1924, and this life expectancy is as of the date of death, February 23rd, 1972, is 25.9 years.
Now, is that an average figure?
Yes, it is.
Of what person are we speaking when you say that that is the life expectancy of a male born that day who died?
The tables I have used, the statistics that the table is derived from is from average Canadian male mortality. This is includes healthy and unhealthy males in Canada, all Canadian population.
It doesn't take into account then the person who will die tomorrow as well as the person who will quite outlive that projected life expectancy. And who has developed this statistical information?
These statistics were produced in 1961 from the 1961 Canadian Census. It was prepared by the Dominion Bureau of Statistics in Ottawa. And as I say, the figures in effect are 10 years old. It was 1961 data that I'm used.
Bearing that in mind, and that we are now in 1972, are those figures outdated, or can you interpret that for us?
They're slightly outdated. If anything, mortality has improved slightly over the past 10 years. This is, I think, a well-recognized fact. And so, if anything, the figures I've given are a little bit on the low side. The figures would be a little bit higher than the 25
Today we might
point.
expect somewhat longer life expectancy.
That's right.
Right. Did you also, at my request, develop the life expectancy of a Canadian female born the 5th of November, 1926?
Yes, I did.
And that was how many years?
That is 32.8 years, and again, this is taken as of the date of death, February
Right.
23rd, 1972. Same statistics were used as a base for this.
And since we're concerned here, as you know, with a husband and wife unit, did you also develop for me the joint life expectancy of those same 2 people that
Yes,
we've
I
just
did.
spoken of?
Yes.
And what was the joint life expectancy of them as you developed it?
That is 22.4 years.
Can you explain readily why it is that their joint life expectancy is somewhat less than the life expectancy of the least?
Yes, the joint life expectancy takes into account the fact that either one of them may die first. It's the period during which both of them stay alive, so that as soon as the first one dies, the expectancy in effect stops. So that,
See? Then, proceeding beyond that, did you also, at my request, calculate the capital sum that would be required as of the date of the accident with which we're concerned to produce $1,000 a year at various rates of interest.
Yes, I did.
And at my request, did you make those calculations with respect to the joint life expectancy of those two people
Yes.
at the rates of 4, 5, and 6% interest?
Yes.
Would you start with the lower interest rate and tell me what sum of money we would require today to invest at 4% so as to pay $1,000 a year for that joint life expectancy on the assumption that the whole sum will be used? That is, we're eating up principal as well as, or capital as well as principal.
Right. At 4% for 22.4 years, which is the joint life expectancy, the capital sum required is $15,198.
$15,198,
Yes.
and at 5%,
$13,958.
and at 6%,
$12,875.
800.
Could I have that again, please?
$12,875.
Thank you.
Now, that's to each of those figures relates to the production of $1,000 a year.
That's right.
If we were to concern ourselves with producing $5,000 a year, would we simply multiply those figures by 5?
That's correct.
Or if it was $10,000 a year, we want to multiply by 10?
Right.
And so with any figure that we wished, eh?
That's right.
Now, in addition to calculations based on the joint life expectancy that we've discussed, did you also, at my request, make the same sort of calculation with an abbreviated life expectancy?
Yes, I did.
Did you do it for 10-year period?
Yes.
And for each of the same interest rate?
Yes.
Would you give me those then in order? This is $1,000 a year for 10 years, eating up the principal,
Right.
produced by a 4% investment?
Right.
Right.
That figure is $8,435.
435. And at 5%?
$8,108.
And at 6?
$7,802.
Right. And did you make the calculation at 15 years?
Yes, I did.
Would you give me the same figures again? 4%?
4% is $11,563.
5%?
$10,899.
Could I have that again, please, Mr. Lawford?
$10,899.
Thank you.
And 6?
$10,295.
Right. Now, bearing in mind that we're seeking to use not only interest payments but also principal, do investments which allow you to encroach on capital pay as high a rate of interest as ones which do not? That is long-term investments as opposed to short?
Sorry, could you reword that question, please?
Do you get a higher rate of interest on a short-term or a long-term investment?
You get it on a long-term investment.
And do you get a higher rate of interest the greater the risk in the investment or the lesser, the less?
The greater the risk, the higher the rate of
higher.
interest.
Right. So that if we're looking for a short-term investment so as to have liquidity, and we're looking for a secure investment so as to guarantee the return, are we looking at a high or a lower rate of interest?
A lower rate of interest.
Are you in your position concerned with government-produced statistics with respect to consumer price indexes?
Not directly, but I have looked up these figures and they are available to me, yes.
And did you look them up for me?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us briefly what sort of trend, if there is any, they demonstrate in terms of that consumer price index over the course of the last 10 years?
There's a slightly increasing trend. There seems to be, on average, about a 3% increase per year over the last 10, 11, 12 years, something of that order.
3% per year.
Right.
Is that an inflationary sort of
Yes.
tendency?
Yes.
What effect on the buying capacity of our dollar has that tendency?
Makes our dollar, in effect, worth less than in future terms than it is in today's terms.
Right. Now, are high interest rates ordinarily associated with inflationary periods or with non-inflationary periods, or do you know?
I don't know.
Right. I think I have no other questions. Thank you, sir.
Prosecutor.
Thank you, my lord. Was it Imperial Life you told us you were associated with, Mr. Lawfrey?
No, it's Confederation Life.
I beg your pardon. Confederation Life, then, writes life insurance.
Right.
And one of the factors taken into consideration by them in arriving at premiums is the life expectancy of a Canadian male or a Canadian female.
That's right.
Is that correct? And then is the premium for a woman lower than for a male at any given age because she has a greater life expectancy?
That's right. For life insurance.
For life insurance,
Yes.
But now, in addition to using life expectancy in arriving at a premium, Confederation Life also gives medical examinations before insuring most people. Is that not correct?
That's right. Except for small amounts. We wouldn't on small amounts.
All right. For any significant or substantial amount, your company wants a medical examination of the proposed insured.
Yes.
And depending on the outcome of that medical examination, Confederation Life may charge a higher premium for one person than for another.
Yes, that's right.
And depending on the outcome of that medical examination, Confederation Life may refuse to insure a person for any premium.
That's right.
Do you know anything about how difficult it makes it for a person to get insurance if it's determined that he has a malignant tumor?
In my limited knowledge of that, I would say it makes it quite difficult.
Might it even be impossible?
Might be. It depends on how advanced the situation is. We tend to feel there's a price for everything, and so that we...
But it makes it pretty difficult,
Yeah.
and it puts the premium up tremendously,
Yes, it does.
doesn't it?
Right.
And the reason that it puts the premium up tremendously is because that person has a very much greater, a very much lesser life expectancy than the average.
That's right.
Now, Mr. Lawfrey, in giving the sums required to produce $1,000 at various rates of interest, you have dealt only with self-liquidating annuities. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there are other types of investment from which much higher rates of interest can be obtained. Is that not correct?
Yes, but not self-liquidating.
Yes, but not self-liquidating.
Yes.
Now, it was only with respect to self-liquidating that you were asked.
That's right.
There's no rule that says that a widow must invest the money that she has or the money that she gets in a self-liquidating type of investment.
No, if she needs so much money every year, then in effect she does need a self-liquidating type of investment.
Well, by self-liquidating, what we mean is that it's all gone at the end. Isn't that correct?
Right, and but we're also saying we're paying out a certain amount as we go along. You're not leaving the whole principal sum invested for the whole period.
And in that way, you know exactly how much you're going to get each year.
Right.
But if you could get that amount of income for the same amount of investment and have it left at the end, you'd be a lot better off, wouldn't you?
Yes.
You just wouldn't be able to compute as precisely what it would take to give you that much and have nothing left.
That's right.
That's right. So basically, the great advantage and the only real advantage in the self-liquidating investment is that you would know precisely what you needed to have nothing left at the end of your life expectancy.
That's right.
But now, if we went to, and just staying with very high-grade bonds, bonds of long term and with high security, you can get 8 and 9% at the present time, can't you, Mr. Law?
Yes, if you leave the money invested for the whole period.
Well, in the type of investment that you've described, a self-liquidating annuity, the money remains invested for the period, doesn't it?
Part of it is paid out each year to the annuitant.
Right? Part. The interest on the bond is paid out each year to the bondholder, too.
Right.
So in that way, they're the same.
Right.
And in another way, they're different in that you can get a much higher rate of interest.
That's right.
Now, you told us, Mr. Lawfrey, that in the last 10 years, we've had an average rate of inflation of 3% per year.
Yes.
That's been the last 10 years. There have been other periods in the past 30 years when there haven't been such rates of inflation. Is that not correct?
I'm not an economist. I can't really say.
Would you agree with me that if there were such periods in the past, that there's no validity in concluding that because we had a 3% annual rate of inflation for the past 10 years, we'll have a 3% rate of inflation for the next 10 years?
Yes, that's possibly true. As I say, I'm not an economist. I can't really predict into the future.
But you're a logical man,
Yes.
even though you're not an economist. And we both know that if we had an economist here, we could get 3 others who wouldn't agree with you.
Right.
And in fact, in suggesting that you can excuse me, my lord, Mr. Lawfrey, I'll start over on that. The fact that something has occurred in the past doesn't mean it's going to occur in the future.
That's true.
That's all. Thank you.
No reason.
Thank you, Mr. Law. Your next witness, Mr. Goudie, please.
Thank you, Mark. Mr. Rothwell, please.
Open your right hand, face right, please.
You swear that the evidence to be given by you to the court and to the jury sworn touching the matters in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me.
I do.
Mr. Rothwell, are you an accountant?
Yes, I am.
Practicing that profession here in Toronto?
Yes, in Toronto.
And have you a branch office as well in Brampton?
Yes, I have.
What is the name of your company?
Adams and Company.
And I understand that Robert Paget was employed by you at some time prior to his death in the Brampton office.
Yes, he was. That's correct.
What was his role there?
Well, Bob was the manager of the Brampton office. It was an office employing 4 to 5 clerical people. Bob managed that office.
And in addition to the clerical people, would there be other accountants or accountancy students there?
Yes, the office was an office that had both audit and bookkeeping type of work. And Bob was responsible to service the audit accounts and supervise the bookkeeping work that had to be carried out.
in terms of the rapport of your company with its clientele in Brampton, whose responsibility was that?
Well, Bob developed very well in this manner. He had the confidence of the clients. He looked after the audit clients very well. He would occasionally have me come in to sit and work with him on some certain problems, but generally he handled it very well, and he supervised the staff very well. I was quite satisfied with Bob's work for us in the Brampton office.
Was he also a chartered accountant?
Yes, Bob was a chartered accountant. I think he graduated in 1951.
And for what length of time had he been employed with Adams and Company?
15 years.
Throughout that time in the Brampton office?
Yes.
And during that time, was he always its manager?
Yes, it was a small office, and I worked, of course, a great deal more closely with Bob in the initial stages, and it developed, and he developed as the manager of the office.
You say it developed. Did the branch office operation grow during the time that he was there?
Yes, it did.
Was he a valued employee?
Yes, Bob, I thought, was a very valued employee. He had good, sound technical approaches to things, had good ethics, and I was pleased to have him represent Adams and Company.
Right. Then, what did he earn during the last full year that he worked prior to his death?
He received $12,000 gross salary for the year, and there was approximately $2,000 taxes withheld, so that he had a net take-home of $10,000.
Right. And would he be paid on a monthly basis, weekly, or how?
Yes. Monthly. Our policy was to pay monthly, net of taxes, of course. He would receive his net check each month.
So that what he got was his without regard to taxes?
That's correct.
Right. Now, had it not been for his death, what would you envisage his future with the company to have been in terms of income?
Well, this is always a problem, of course, when you have someone in Bob's position as a manager, and it's something that the practitioners discuss when they get together. There's a concern about competitiveness, someone taking them away. But I would have thought that with the growth anticipated in the office, and with Bob assuming the responsibilities along with that growth, that over a 5 to 7 year period, he would have peaked out at about $18,000, and that would have been the maximum.
Right. And when you say that that would have been the maximum, did you anticipate as a likelihood that he would reach that maximum in about that length of time?
I would have thought so.
And is that $18,000 figure one that you arrive at in terms of considering today's market for that type of accountant, if you understand my point?
Yeah, I think I do, yes. I'm looking at an increase due to natural addition of business, inflation. Bob's income would go up related to that,
right,
but it would not exceed 18.
And related to the desire, if I understood you, to keep him rather than have someone else take him.
Well, that's true. This is always a factor.
And would you have given up his services readily to someone else?
No, I would have tried very hard to hold him, because he seemed to fit well into that particular type of practice, and I thought we had a good association. It's hard to find people of this type.
Over the course of time that you knew him as an employee, what did his general health appear to you to be?
Well, I felt Bob enjoyed good health, at least from the productivity in the office. I would be in touch with the office continually. He was always there, and was not hesitant to take on a workload, and these to me were indications he was enjoying good health.
Mm-hmm. Had you any indication that he was suffering from any serious illness?
No, none
during
whatsoever.
that time?
None whatsoever.
Did you know him socially at all?
Well, on a limited basis.
What knowledge had you, first-hand knowledge, of any extracurricular activities that he had?
Well, Bob encouraged him to, of course, join the Brampton Curling Club, and he did socialize there. Aside from that, I would see Bob at our company fairs. We had an annual company Christmas party and an annual golf tournament, and Bob would be there. My other contact with him would be mostly on occasions where we would meet on a business reason. I might be at his home to review files or to discuss administration problems with the branch. I met his wife and of course, his children.
Mm-hmm. And did you form any impression from those meetings of the family as to whether or not this was a happy family?
Oh, I would say very much. Bob was a quiet fellow and a very nice person and a church man.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown.
Cross-examination.
Mr. Rothwell, in the years that Mr. Paget had been with your company, other accountants had come with the company. Is that not correct?
With our Toronto office, yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. Mhm.
And is it not also correct that some of them had gone past Mr. Paget in earnings with your company?
Yes, they ultimately did exceed his earnings, yes.
And in fact, in one particular way at least, Mr. Paget didn't seem to be very ambitious. He didn't seem to want a partnership in your firm, did he?
Well, Bob had never actually made any approaches to me to be entered into the partnership of the firm.
And he had been with your firm how long?
15 years.
Is it not rather unusual that a man will be with a firm for that length of time and manifest no ambitions toward a partnership?
In many instances, it's not. There are certain characteristics that make up a partner, and Bob didn't have those characteristics.
In other words, there were some very marked limitations either on his ability or his aggressiveness.
Yes, on his aggressiveness, because he certainly was qualified as a person.
That's all. Thank you.
Re-examination.
One question, Mr. Rothwell. I take it that the selection of one's partners is a very personal thing.
How do you mean that? I'm sorry, I don't have
This is still my friend's witness. And the question was, if it was a question, I take it that a partnership is a very personal thing. Surely that's the very
I regret the form of the question, my lord, not the substance.
I think it might be difficult to deal with it, my lord, now in a fair way, having put it to the witness in that way.
I won't press the point, my lord.
Very well.
Thank you, Mr. Rothwell.
Thank you, Mr. Rothwell.
Thank you, my lord.
Mr. Goudie.
Thank you, my lord. I'd like to close my case with the reading of a few questions from the defendant's examination on discovery.
Would you first explain to the members of the jury what an examination for discovery is, please?
Certainly, my lord. Gentlemen, the rules that govern the conduct of a civil action allow each party at some stage before the trial to question through his lawyer the opposite party. In a situation where the parties are placed under oath before an officer of the court and counsel then question the opposition in order to learn as much as they can about the case and to obtain admissions from the opposition, which they may be able to use as part of their own case. In this instance, Mr. Wright attended before the special examiner on the 23rd of June. I questioned him about the accident. He was under oath at the time. The questions and answers were recorded by the examiner. I have a transcript of those questions and answers here. Because they are in effect admissions by the defendant, I'm able to read them into my evidence on the case to the extent that they help me. And I intend to read briefly from those. Question 1, what is your full name, please? Answer, Stephen Bright. Where do you reside? 123 Avenue Road, Toronto. Question 3, what is your age? Answer, 32. Question 4, what is your occupation? Answer, I'm a salesman with Toronto Novelty and Toy Company. Question 5, now on the 9th day of February 1972, were you the owner and driver of a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette which came into collision with the late Robert Paget? Answer, yes. Question 6, and as a result of the collision with your vehicle, did the late Robert Paget suffer injuries from which he eventually died? Answer, yes. Question 7, did you have a license to drive at the time of the accident? Answer, yes, I had an operator's license. Question 8, what was the length of your driving experience up to this accident? Answer, about 6 years. Question 9, how long had you owned this Chevrolet Corvette up to the time of the accident? Answer, about 4 months. That's the case for the plaintiff, Miller.
Members of the jury, in the opening remarks that I made to you and in Mr. Goudie's opening remarks, it was pointed out to you that what counsel say cannot be treated as evidence. What has just occurred, however, is an exception to that rule. And what Mr. Goudie has read to you now becomes evidence in this case, and it's evidence upon which you can act. Mr. FitzPatrick, do you wish to open to the jury?
Yes, thank you, my lord. May it please you, my lord, gentlemen of the jury, you have heard from his lordship and Mr. Goudie that what Mr. Goudie and I have to say to you, with the exception pointed out by his lordship, is not evidence. And you may properly wonder, if that's the case, why we speak to you, and if it has any useful purpose apart from letting us speak. I submit to you that most of us remember things better when we have a pattern in our minds, that isolated things and things which have no apparent relevance when we hear them are difficult to remember. Whereas if we have a pattern in our minds, and we recognize the relevance of something when we hear it, we're more likely to remember it. Now, that is the purpose in my speaking to you, that you will get early in the defendant's case the pattern of his case, so that as you hear the different bits and pieces of the evidence, you will have some idea of where to fit them. Now, it's my duty to be very careful to not state the evidence, to state it so carefully that it almost certainly will be the evidence that you will hear. But there's no way that I can be certain about that. And as his lordship has pointed out to you and will point out to you, you must listen very carefully to the evidence and not be confused with what I say. You have sworn your oaths that you will try this case on the evidence, and that is the evidence that's given from the witness box, apart from what was read in from the discovery by Mr. Goudie. You gentlemen are the judges of the facts, and the facts, as you find them to be, are the facts upon which the rights between the parties here will be determined. Now, gentlemen, on the 9th day of February 1972, the defendant in this action, Mr. Bright, went to a hockey game at Maple Leaf Gardens. After that hockey game, he and his friend, Miss Hanson, went out to have a drink afterwards, and you will hear that Miss Hanson had a gin and tonic and Mr. Bright had a beer. They had a quarrel and left for Miss Hanson's home in Brampton quite early, around 10:30 in the evening. They drove westerly on Provincial Highway number 7, and Mr. Bright was driving with his headlights on the down beam as he had been passing eastbound traffic. When he was a short distance west of Highway 27, he put his beams up, and as he did so, saw some object on the road ahead of him. He slammed on his brakes, attempted to turn his car, but as you know, as long as your brakes are on fully and your wheels are locked, that is not possible. His car traveled about 100 feet, as indicated by a skid mark, and then struck the late Mr. Paget and the left rear corner of his car. You will hear the evidence that Mr. Bright saw only one headlight. Now it will be for you to decide why he saw only one headlight.
Tail light?
Tail light. You have heard the evidence of Mrs. Paget in that regard, and that will be dealt with in argument rather than at this time. You have heard the evidence that there was room for Mr. Paget to have moved his car further to the north, and that there was a lane just 100 feet west of where the accident happened. Now, there is one other piece of evidence that you will hear that it will be argued is of great significance in this case. It was mentioned by Mr. Goudie in his opening, and that is that a pathologist at the Toronto General Hospital, in performing a routine autopsy on Mr. Paget, after his death, discovered that he had a solitary myeloma in one of his vertebrae. You will hear the evidence that this would have significantly reduced the life expectancy of Mr. Paget. And as it is one of your duties in this action to determine what amount of money Mrs. Paget and the Paget children lost as a result of their father's death, how long he would probably have lived apart from this accident, is one of the most important issues that you will have to decide. Thank you, my lord. Thank you, gentlemen.